Welcome to the 116th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are reading Henry George's Progress and Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and increase of want with increase of wealth, published in 1879. It sort of changed the world and stopped changing the world, but we want it to change the world again. We continue in Book 10, The Law of Human Progress, Chapter 4, How Civilization May Decline, How Modern Civilization May Decline. And mostly last time we just read about how people like bad art, so everything's declining. I talked to my Georgist friends a lot about maybe bad art is a result of commercialization or commercial art, which is a result of copyright. Copyright would or abolishing copyright would definitely affect certain artistic practices more than others. Of course, performance art or not performance art, but art that is performed would be pretty immune from that. But certain forms of art, performance art, whatever. All right. Let's keep reading about how modern civilization may decline. George writes, for instance, flogging as a punishment for certain offenses has been recently restored to the Penal Code of England and has been strongly advocated on this side of the Atlantic. I express no opinion as to whether this is or is not a better punishment for crime than imprisonment. I only point to the fact as illustrating how an increasing amount of crime and an increasing embarrassment as to the maintenance of prisoners, both obvious tendencies at present, might lead to a fuller return to the physical cruelty of barbarous codes. The use of torture and judicial investigations, which steadily grew with the decline of Roman civilization, it is thus easy to see, might, as manners brutalized and crime increased, be demanded as a necessary improvement of the criminal law. All right, well, there's a huge discussion you could have here about the justice system. I don't have too many strong thoughts on this. I've read a book about restorative justice, and that seemed cool. As cool as crime can be. I don't know. There's both some failings of physical punishment, but it sure seems weird to me that humans would respond best to zero physical punishment. I know that's a little bit crazy to say. Am I going to spank my kids? I don't have any kids. I probably will do whatever the mother of my kids wants to do. I don't think spanking is necessary. Anyway, maybe George is right. We don't need physical correction. Whether in the present drifts of opinion and taste there are as yet any indications of retrogression, it is not necessary to inquire. But there are many things about which there can be no dispute. What are these things about which there can be no dispute? Which go to show that our civilization has reached a critical period and that unless a new start is made in the direction of social equality, the 19th century may, to the future, mark its climax. These industrial depressions, which cause as much waste and suffering as famines or wars, are like the twinges and shocks which precede paralysis. Everywhere it is evident that the tendency to inequality, which is the necessary result of material progress where land is monopolized, cannot go much further without carrying our civilization into that downward path, which is so easy to enter and so hard to abandon. Everywhere the increasing intensity of the struggle to live, the increasing necessity for straining every nerve to prevent being thrown down and trodden underfoot in the scramble for wealth, is draining the forces which gain and maintain improvements. In every civilized country, pauperism, crime, insanity, and suicides are increasing. In every civilized country, the diseases are increasing, which come from overstrained nerves, from insufficient nourishment, from squalid lodgings, from unwholesome and monotonous occupations, from premature labor of children, from the tasks and crimes which poverty imposes upon women. In every highly civilized country, the expectation of life, which gradually rose for several centuries, and which seems to have culminated about the first quarter of this century, appears to be now diminishing. Statistics which show these things are collected in convenient form and volume entitled Deterioration and Race Education by Samuel Royce, which has been largely distributed by the Venerable Peter Cooper of New York. Strangely enough, the only remedy proposed by Mr. Royce is the establishment of kindergarten schools. This part of Progress and Poverty always throws me into this dilemma. If George is a seer, if he's right, he is making all these claims. And they seem to be wrong because it seems like we did not peak at that time. We peaked later. And it seems like things aren't as bad as he describes. However, and I think I've talked about this before, there's a couple escape routes you can take. One, that we did get a lot of reforms. None that were exactly George's remedy, but we do have a land value tax. It's something that I don't really say very much. But property tax is a partly land value tax, as it is most often assessed. It is a combination of the value of the land and a value of the structure on top. So it's a very small land, or in George's view, in my view, a small land value tax, and then a bad property tax or structure tax. We have had a decision to retard our progress by taxing many other forms. I don't know forms of what though, because land is not a form of industry. So I wouldn't want to say other forms of industry, but we have taxed a bunch of other things and created a welfare state. Yes, it's not as large as certain other countries' welfare states. Some countries have done better and worse with those welfare states. And then I guess the other point I could make is, and this is the one that's hardest for me to back up, is that for all the people below George's wedge, things are as bad or worse now. And this sort of would fly in the face of tons of claims about how global poverty in the last 100 years has improved. I don't know if you need to be global about this sort of thing, especially because in most parts, George's claim was about America mostly, that it has peaked. Many other parts of the globe, it's just such a variety of shapes for their economy. Anyway, this is the conflict I run across here because if we managed to help poor people, if the plight of poor people got better and we also progressed generally, and we did this without the land value tax, you know, what does that mean? Is the land value tax necessary? And I can sort of squirm past those arguments with what I said about the partial reforms that we did implement, and then you could just sort of say George was just incorrect about his prediction of when we peaked and how much momentum the uh, economic the American economy had, and our momentum carried us for another 40, 50, 60, 70 years or something, or 100 years. I mean, it's been 150 years just about since George wrote. Or, maybe the land issue is not as significant as George thought, but I don't know. All right, that was a lot. All right, George continues. It is not an advancing civilization that such figures show. It is a civilization which in its undercurrents have already begun to recede. When the tide turns in bay or river from flood to ebb, it is not all at once, but here it still runs on, though there it has begun to recede. When the sun passes the meridian, it can be told only by the way the short shadows fall, for the heat of the day yet increases, but as sure as the turning tide must soon run full ebb, as sure as the declining sun must bring darkness, so sure is it that though knowledge yet increases and invention marches on, and new states are being settled, and cities still expand, yet civilization has begun to wane. In proportion to population, we must build more and more prisons, more and more almshouses, more and more insane asylums. It is not from top to bottom that societies die, it is from bottom to top. But there are evidences far more palpable than any that can be given by statistics of tendencies to the ebb of civilization. See, I mean, the thing is, like, I look at my parents, and my mom, daughter of a farmer, my stepdad, son of like a factory worker, and my dad, son of a, shoe salesman. And they were all able to do fairly well. Ended up each being able to like buy houses or and have a career. And not from they didn't really any of them benefit from a significant inheritance. It seems a little bit odd to me sometimes to think that George was so right, um, yet that didn't really come into play until my generation, like till the millennials turned 30. Then it was like, okay, that was it. That was the moment that now a generation can't afford to buy anything because it's all been bought up. I don't know. Back to George. There's a vague but general feeling of disappointment and increased bitterness among the working classes. I mean, maybe, you could see in a sense it might have been getting harder and harder for each generation to buy a home. Uh, I don't know. There is a vague but general feeling of disappointment and increased bitterness among the working classes, a widespread feeling of unrest and brooding revolution. If this were accompanied by a definite idea of how relief is to be obtained, it would be a hopeful sign, but it is not. Though the schoolmaster has been abroad some time, the general power of tracing effect to cause does not seem a whit improved. The reaction toward protectionism as the reaction toward other exploded fallacy, maybe this was supposed to be explored, fallacies of government shows this. In point of constructive statesmanship, the recognition of fundamental principles and the adaptation of means to ends, the Constitution of the United States, adopted a century ago, is greatly superior to the latest state constitutions, the most recent of which is that of California, a piece of utter botchwork. Huh. I wonder if he talks more about this in the Our Land and Land Policy, which he wrote before Progress and Poverty, but it was more California centric. And even the philosophic freethinker cannot look upon that vast change in religious ideas that is now sweeping over the civilized world without feeling that this tremendous fact may have most momentous relations which only the future can develop. For what is going on is not a change in the form of religion, but the negation and destruction of the ideas from which religion springs. Christ so he's writing in 79, and I think Nietzsche wrote God is Dead in like 1860 or something. 1882. He hadn't even written it yet. Uh, George is anticipating such things. Christianity is not simply clearing itself of superstitions, but in the popular mind, it is dying at the root. As the old paganisms were dying when Christianity entered the world, and nothing arises to take its place. The fundamental ideas of an intelligent creator and of a future life are in the general mind rapidly weakening. Now, whether this may or may not be in itself an advance, the importance of the part which religion has played in the world's history shows us the importance of the change that is now going on. Unless human nature has suddenly altered in what the universal history of the race shows us to be its deepest characteristics, okay, so unless human nature has suddenly altered, the mightiest actions and reactions are thus preparing. Such stages of thought have heretofore always marked periods of transition. On a smaller scale and to a less depth, for I think anyone who will notice the drift of our literature and talk upon such subjects with the men he meets, will see that it is subsoil and not surface plowing the materialistic ideas are now doing. I mean, maybe I'm just really under crediting, World War One and World War Two, uh, the Great Depression following the long depression that was happening or just wrapping up while George was writing. When did Depression, the long depression. Um, so the long depression, 1873 through 1879, or through 1896, an extra 20 years. Um, and then the Great Depression, another war, yeah. Such a state of thought preceded the French Revolution, but the closest parallel to the wreck of religious ideas now going on is to be found in that period in which ancient civilization. I forget, I've also made the argument a number of times that globalization has enabled Western developed nations, especially the USA, um, to exploit the land of the rest of the world. Like our marginal land for commerce is not so much like the borders of Los Angeles or New York. It's, you know, random places in other continents and nations. Like it's the whole earth now. And so in a sense, because of those above George's wedge have been able to exploit the whole earth, the land of the whole earth, um, that then through a welfare state, all of that, it's like we have. I mean, we if we had to actually provide a welfare state to all of the peoples and of whose lands we are exploiting nationwide, there like just wouldn't be enough to go around to give to our local poor. Like you look at Amazon's headquarters, I guess in Seattle, or Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. If Apple had to actually um, compensate all of the lands where they're exploiting the minerals and resources from, uh, yeah, there wouldn't, you know, wouldn't be enough. I don't know, something like that. All right, let's finish this paragraph off. The closest parallel to the wreck of religious ideas now going on is to be found in that period in which ancient civilization began to pass from splendor to decline. What change may come, no mortal man can tell, but that some great change must come, thoughtful men begin to feel. The civilized world is trembling on the verge of a great movement. Either it must be a leap upward, which will open the way to advances yet undreamed of, or it must be a plunge downward which will carry us back toward barbarism. Yeah. I mean this dilemma, it's like neither of those happened. So what did George sort of get wrong? We had a huge we had several world wars, and then which just sort of reset us, and then we continued in our same way. We didn't get obliterated back to barbarism. We carried on. I don't know. All right, well, that's the end of this daily devotional. See you next time.